What's going on YouTube? CyberOptek here with a brand new video for you today, and in this video we're going to be talking about normal maps. Now there are a lot of different things that we could talk about when it comes to normal maps, especially on different ways to create them. Obviously I wouldn't have time to go over all of those inside of one video, but this video is mainly going to be concentrated on two different things. First and foremost, we're going to be talking about the basics of normal mapping. That way you can sort of get a feel of what they are doing and what they are used for. And then we're going to be talking about hand drawing your normal maps, because in a lot of cases, drawing them out yourself will give you a lot more control over what it is you are trying to do inside of your project. So that's what we're going to be talking about inside of this video today. So anyways, let's go. So the first thing we're going to talk about inside of this video is what is a normal map. Now I do realize that some people finding this video may already know this information. If you do, please feel free to use the chapters in the description below to skip ahead. However, I do like including this for anyone who is new to the channel or maybe new to using normal maps. Now, what exactly is a normal map? Well, a normal map is going to be assets that you're going to draw out for your project, which are going to add surface details that are not part of the original mesh. So for example, if you want certain pieces that are going to protrude outward or maybe protrude inward on top of your project, you can actually use normal maps in order to do this without messing with the original mesh of the weapon model. Now, these are basically a type of bump map. So if you understand what a bump map is, you should pretty much understand the concept of a normal map. And then the final thing to understand about them is that it uses a combination of colors to determine the direction and steepness of an angle. So all of the different angles that you are adding to your project are going to be based on the color that you use inside of your normal map. So that's just sort of a basic overview of what a normal map is. Now, whenever you get ready to start creating your normal maps, there are a couple of different ways that you can do this. The first method, which we're going to be talking about inside of this video, is hand drawing your normal maps. There are some key concepts that once you sort of understand, it will make it very easy for you to draw these out yourself if you so choose. However, if you do not feel like hand drawing them, just know that there are a lot of programs that you can also use in order to create your normal maps. You can use things such as Photoshop or GIMP. Both of these have a way to create normal maps. Also, some of the bigger programs such as Substance Painter, Blender, these will also allow you to create them as well. So it's really just up to you which method you want to use in order to create these normal maps for your project. A few other important key notes that I wanted to make when it comes to creating your own normal maps. First and foremost, throughout this video, you are going to see me using the default normal maps from the game files and then placing my normal maps on top of them. And one of the reasons for this is that those default normal maps are actually high poly. So unless you have one of these expensive programs and you're actually creating your own high poly models, you're going to want to use these default normal maps and then just place your files on top of them so that you can get the best results. The next thing I wanted to bring up, of course, is blur. Now, if you are hand drawing out your normal maps, you may have a lot of sharp edges. Once you export this and bring it over inside of the game, you may start noticing some artifacting right around the edges of your normal maps, some little white and black lines that sort of move as the weapon moves. So one of the ways that you can fix this is just by simply going in and adding a little bit of blur to your normal maps, and that will sort of soften up those edges and make all of that artifacting go away. The third thing I wanted to mention, of course, is understanding the direction of the colors for the desired results. We're going to actually be talking about that in the next part of this video. And then finally, I wanted to just say, be careful not to overuse normal mapping. I have seen weapons on the workshop where normal mapping was highly overused, and it really made the weapon skin look way too busy. So just be aware of this. Whenever you are creating your normal maps, just be careful not to overuse it too much inside of your project. So the first thing we're going to talk about inside of this video is hand drawing your normal maps. Now, whenever it comes to drawing these things out yourself, there are some key concepts that you need to understand before you start adding these to your project. And one of the most important of these is the direction of your colors. Based on the direction of them, it's going to decide whether or not your objects protrude outward from the body or whether they sink inward. Now, as you can see, I've already drawn out this pyramid shape here, and this is sort of what I'm going for. I want these pieces to protrude outward from the body. If you look in this example right here, you can see that I've already added them to the side of the Glock. You can also see that they are standing outward. So in order to do that, I need to decide which colors I'm going to add to all of the different sides of my object right here. Now, as this diagram currently stands with this octagon right here in the bottom left, also this one being on top, if I was to use the corresponding colors on this chart right here with the corresponding sides on this object, this is actually going to stick outward. So let's just go ahead and do that real quick. So let's go to this first piece and let's turn on our fill and let's just select this color right here. Next, let's go ahead and do the top with our green color. Let's select this right side and do it with this peachy orange color right here. And then finally, I'm going to do the bottom piece, and I just want to select my purple right here at the bottom. Next, I want to turn the stroke off on this. Obviously, you do not want these black lines running through your normal map. I'm just going to select all of these pieces and go to my stroke paint and turn it off. And now, as you can see, I have drawn out this pyramid design, and this is actually going to protrude outward from the body. Now, let's say that you actually wanted this to go inward instead of sticking outward. All you would simply have to do is go right here to your diagram. You would flip this vertically and then horizontally. Now, if I matched up the colors with the corresponding sides on this object right here, it would actually go inward instead of protruding outward. So that's sort of the first key concept to understand whenever it comes to drawing out your own normal maps for your project. The second key concept that I wanted to talk about when it comes to colors is being able to control the angles or the steepness of your objects. Now, in the first example, I actually used these colors that were all the way on the outside edges of this diagram. But let's say that I didn't want my object to stick this far out from the body of the weapon. Maybe I actually wanted something that was a little less steep, maybe something like that. If this is actually the desired result, then all you simply have to do is move a little bit further inside of this diagram, and then of course stay on this same row all the way around in order to make it isometric. So real quickly, let's just go ahead and do that. Let's select this side right here, and let's stay inside of this row right here. So let's go ahead and select this color. Let's select this color. And then finally, let's select this purple color. Now, by going further into this diagram right here, we've actually created this sort of result with less steep angles on our design. So that's the second key concept to understand whenever it comes to drawing out your own normal maps for your project. The third key concept that I wanted to talk about happens whenever you are adding additional pieces to your normal map. Now, as you can see, I still have my original pyramid right here, but one thing you'll notice is that I've added these extra little angles right here. And basically what this is going to do is create a trench that runs all along the outside of my pyramid. But by doing so, I've actually reduced the distance from the top of the pyramid down to the surface of the weapon. Now, this green line right here represents the surface, and by adding these extra pieces, what I've actually done is moved it up to here, reducing the distance between this peak and the surface. So that's a key concept to understand whenever it comes to drawing out your own normal maps. Now, obviously, a lot of things can affect this. If I made these pieces right here a lot larger, this line would come up a lot higher, so this would be reduced even more. Also, the steepness of these angles can also affect where this surface sits as well. So that's just sort of a key concept to understand whenever you are adding additional pieces to your normal map objects. The fourth key concept when it comes to adding your colors is just always be aware of where your light sources are coming from. So let's say, for example, we want to color in this part of our pyramid. I'm just going to use this side as the example. Let's go ahead and fill it in with the corresponding color right here on our chart. Now we want to figure out what color needs to go on this piece right here. Bear in mind that since both of these are at the exact same angle, and if our light source is coming down like this, both of these pieces are going to need this exact same color right here. So in order to color this in, all we'd simply have to do is go to this piece, turn our fill on, and make them the exact same color. Likewise, let's say that we wanted to reduce this angle. Maybe we wanted this one to be very steep and this one to be not so steep. Basically, we could do the exact same thing, but on this piece right here, we could just move a little bit further in on our diagram and select a lighter color. And this would be the result that we would get. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. Whenever you are figuring out which colors to add to all of these additional pieces, just sort of think about it in this way. Since this piece and this piece right here are both going to be basically getting the same light source, they're also going to be using the exact same color. Now, to this point in the video, we basically talked about all of these different colors and creating angles, but also don't forget that you have a flat color right here in the middle as well. This is a hexadecimal code of 8080FF. And let's say that you didn't want a perfect pyramid shape. Maybe you wanted something that came up and flattened at the top like this. This can be done very easily. If we take our square tool and sort of draw out a perfect square, we can then take this square and place it right here in the middle of our design, and we can get more of a design that looks more like this from the side. So that's just the final point I wanted to make when it comes to using this graph right here. Not only do you have these colors to create your angles, but you also have this color right here in the center that you can use for flat parts as well. So the next thing we're going to talk about inside of this video are circles, because circles can be very useful whenever you are creating different parts for your normal map. Now, as you can see here, I have this normal circle that I myself created inside of Inkscape. I will put this up inside of my drive in case anyone wants to use it. But the idea I had is that I wanted to create sort of a medallion that would sit right in the middle of a grip. This would sort of go up on the edges, it would flatten out, and then of course it would go back down and have a circle right in the middle that is empty that I could add something else to. So now that I have this inside of my project, the first thing I need to do is I need to create the flat part on the top of this medallion. So let's just go ahead and create our circle. Let's bring it right here on top of this, and let's just resize this until we get it the size that we want it. Once we have this the size that we're happy with, we're just going to select both of these. I'm going to use my align tool, and I'm just going to align both left and right and up and down so that it sits perfectly in the middle. Next, we need to create the part that's going to go inside. So I'm going to do Control-C, Control-V, and bring this to the top and resize it. Maybe something like that. I also want to flip this horizontally and vertically. That way it goes inward instead of going outward like this one. So let's just go ahead and flip this. I'm going to select the circle right behind it to align with. I'm going to hit both the left and right and up and down so that I know it's perfectly in the center. And then finally, I'm going to create one more circle. So let's create this circle here and put it right in the middle. Now we can resize it to where our bevels on the inside are about the same as the bevels on the outside. Then I can take this circle and I can align it again. And now, as you can see, I have a medallion that I can now use on my grip. And this was very easy to do. It was basically two of those normal map circles, one that is inverted and one that is normal. And two of these blue circles to sort of flatten it out here in the middle. So this is just one example of something you can do that's really cool using normal circles inside of your project. Another really cool thing that you can do with these circle normals, let's say that you have two colors like this and you also have a curve in your design and you need a gradient that's going to blend these two colors together. You could use your set clip tool on top of this circle normal in order to cut this piece out. Now, obviously, you can do the same thing in other programs. You could use a masking tool inside of Photoshop, but for this example, I'm just going to be doing this inside of Inkscape. So first things first, I'm just going to copy this piece. I'm going to hit Control C and Control V. Then once I have this piece, the next thing I want to do is I want to make sure that this line and this line perfectly meet right here in the center of this circle normal. So let's just go ahead and move this over. Let's just go ahead and get this exactly where we want it. Once this is placed, we can just simply scroll over the top of both of these objects. We can right click and we can go to Set Clip. Now we can move this piece out of the way, move this one into place, and now we have a perfect gradient that mixes these two colors together. So that's just one really cool thing that you can do with these circle normals. Now again, there are other tools that you can use in other programs to do pretty much the same thing, but once you have these circle normals, you can use them to create these curves inside of your normal maps. So the next thing I want to talk about inside of this video is adding your hand-drawn normal maps to the default normal map from the game files. Now, one of the problems I used to run into whenever I was using Blender was figuring out the exact colors that I needed to use inside of my normal maps based on whether I was adding it to the left-hand side or the right-hand side of a weapon. However, when you add these things directly to the default normal maps, it takes a lot of that guesswork out of it. Now you will remember the concept I talked about at the beginning of this video. If your diagram is in this configuration right here, everything is going to stick outward. But if you flip this horizontal and vertical, and then you add these colors, everything is going to go inward. Now you will notice right here that I have these vents. Obviously these colors are corresponding with this chart right now, meaning that they are going to go inward. But now I want to add this piece to the other side of the weapon. So first and foremost, I'm going to hit Control C and Control V to paste this. Then I'm going to flip this horizontal and bring it in here and place it inside of my project. Now, one thing you will notice is the purple is now on the bottom, whereas it is on the top on these. So obviously this is going to be incorrect. You want all of your colors going in the exact same direction. So let's go ahead and ungroup these. Let's select all of these top pieces right here. Let's go ahead and make those purple, since we want our purple on top. Let's select all of these bottom pieces. Let's make these our green color. Obviously, since we flip this, our angles are going to be different. So let's select this side. Then let's select the corresponding side on our chart, which of course is going to be this yellow color right here. And then finally on these angles, we just want to do the same thing. We want to select all of them. And then we want to select their corresponding color, which of course is going to be this blue. And now by simply switching those colors around, we know that both these vents and these vents right here are both going to go inward. So that's a key concept to understand whenever it comes to adding your own normal maps to the default normal maps. As long as you follow the same concepts that I talked about with the direction of these colors right here, you're always going to know whether or not these objects are going to go inward or whether they are going to protrude outward. The next thing I want to talk about is exporting these normal maps out so that we can use them inside of another program like Photoshop. Now, obviously, if you have drawn all of your assets out inside of a program like Photoshop, there is no need for this step. However, if there are people on my channel that are using other programs such as Inkscape, I did want to show this to you guys very quickly. So the first thing we want to do is we want to export these out as a layer template so that we can then bring them over inside of Photoshop and add them to the default normal map. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to bring this 4096 by 4096 square and I'm just going to snap it to my normal map. I'm going to hold down Shift and select both of these other pieces. I'm also going to hit Control C and Control V. I'm actually not going to mess with these originals in case I ever need to come back to them. And then finally, I'm just going to go right here and turn the fill off on this background so that this is transparent. Now I can select all of these and I can export them, and I have a perfect layer template where both of these pieces are going to line up perfectly with the default normal map. So this is just an extra little piece of advice for those of you who use programs other than Photoshop to draw things out. Once you have all of your assets drawn, you can add them to a transparent background like this. You can turn them into layer templates, and then you can bring them over and use them inside of another program such as Photoshop. The next thing I wanted to talk about, of course, is the blur thing again. I did talk about this a little bit at the beginning. Now, as you can see, I've added these pyramids right here to this project, but you'll notice that all of these lines are very sharp. And one of the things that this is going to do is it's going to create some weird artifacts inside of your design. You're going to see some white and black lines that sort of move right here around these outer edges whenever the weapon moves. So one thing you always want to do whenever you are hand drawing out your normal maps, you always want to make sure and just add a little bit of blur to these. So first things first, I'm going to select this first one. I'm going to go right here to filter and then blur and then Gaussian blur. And then I'm going to add about 1.0 to it. And what this actually does is it just softens those edges out a little bit. It makes them sort of blend into it. And this will actually take care of a lot of those little artifacting issues that you get whenever you are hand drawing your normal maps and bringing them over and adding them to your project. So that's just one thing I wanted to mention. Whenever you are going to be hand drawing normal maps and bringing them in and adding them to the defaults, it's always a good idea to just add a little bit of blur to them to sort of soften the edges so that you don't get a lot of those artifacts once you get it over inside of the game. For the last section of this video, we're actually going to be talking about putting all of our normal maps together so that we can create a TGA file that can be used on the workshop. And the first step in this process is to go ahead and bring in the default normal maps from the game files and add it to your program. Now, you can really use any program that you want. If you want to use GIMP to do this, then by all means do that. However, I am going to be using Photoshop for this example. Also know that if you do not have these default normal maps, I have all of them inside of my Google Drive. I will leave the link down below so that you can go and download them. So the first step in this process is to bring the default normal map in and do any last minute corrections that are needed. So for example, you'll notice right here on the grip that we have this grippy texture. And maybe I do not want this logo or this grippy texture to be inside of my project. There's actually a couple of different ways that we can get rid of this. First and foremost, we could use our paintbrush tool. We could go in here and select a color that's just right to the outside of it. And then of course, we could just go in here and sort of paint over it like so. So that's the first method. The other method would be to use your smudge tool. Now, sometimes the colors will vary inside of these normal maps, and if you don't like the way it's coming out, you can use your smudge tool to use these colors around it to sort of blend into it, like so. So the more and more that I smudge this, you'll notice that it starts to just sort of blend it out of my project. This method usually takes a little bit longer, but some people like it more. So it's just really up to you which method you want to use in order to take out all of this extra stuff inside of your default normal map that you do not need. Now, there are some additional methods that you could use to cover up these default textures inside of your default normal map, but a lot of it is going to depend on the types of normal maps that you have created. So for example, if you have exported your normal maps from a program such as Substance Painter or Blender, more than likely your normal maps are going to have a solid blue background that fills up the entire 4096 by 4096 square. And if you do have a normal map like this, then you're going to have to use an overlay in order to add it to your default normal map. So to give you guys an example, this is actually a texture that I have created, and you'll notice that the entire background is solid blue. This is what one that you export from one of those programs would probably look like. So in order to add this to the default, what I'm actually going to have to do is go right here where this says normal and drop this down to overlay. But you can see what problems this causes. It actually took my texture right here and blended it with the default texture on this map. So in cases like this where you do have that solid blue background, you really only have two options: either to go in with a paintbrush and cover all of this up, or to use another layer template to cover it up, then come in and add this and add your overlay. To show you guys what I'm talking about, this is a layer template of just the grip. And what we could do is go in here and add a color overlay that's going to be 8080FF. Then when we come back and turn this layer on right here, you'll notice that all of that default texture is covered up. So that is one method that you could use. The other way that you could do this is just to cut this texture out using a layer template so that it has a transparent background. I actually have one here inside of my project. And what you'll notice is that I didn't have to add an overlay and I didn't have to use an additional layer template in order to cover up all of that default material. You'll notice that this just has a transparent background to it, and it's just going to lay perfectly over that part of the weapon. So those are just a couple things I wanted to mention. You know, whenever you are layering these things on the default normal map, depending on the type of normal map that you have, it can change the way that you're going to add it inside of your project. So once you have all of your base textures pretty much added to your default normal map, the next thing you're going to want to do is go in and add all of your other assets. Now for me personally, I like to do these as layer templates because it makes this process very easy. So for example, I have created some medallions like the ones that we created earlier in the video, and I've already spaced them out inside of another program. Then I exported it with a transparent background. So basically the only thing I have to do is just bring it in and drop it inside of this program, and they're going to be perfectly placed exactly where I want them. I have also created some bump maps on the inside of this that I've turned into normal maps. We will be talking about that in the next video. But once you have all of your different assets brought in and layered on top of your default normal map, the next step in this process is to export this and turn it into a TGA file. Now, I actually have legacy save as enabled in my Photoshop. I've also tried saving it in many different ways, but for some reason, I don't seem to be able to export TGA files directly from Photoshop anymore. So one thing that I've found to get around that is just to export this out as a PNG file, then bring this over inside of GIMP and use GIMP to turn it into a TGA. So if for some reason you cannot create TGA files directly from your Photoshop, that is sort of a workaround that you can use in order to create these files. So that's pretty much it. You know, once you get all of your assets, just basically layer them right here on top of your default normal map, and then just turn them into a TGA that you can then use on the workshop. So this concludes my video on normal maps and hand drawing them out yourself. Hopefully you guys found this information useful and interesting. Now, inside of the next video, we are going to be taking this a step further. We're actually going to be talking about bump maps. I'm also going to be showing you guys how you can convert those over into normal maps. So definitely, if that's something you are interested in, come back and watch that video as well. But hopefully this information is helping you guys out, and it will be a good start in helping you to create some really cool normal maps for your project. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you would, please leave likes or comments down below, and make sure you hit that subscribe button because it really helps this channel out a lot. Anyways, thank you guys so much, and we'll see you in the next video.